Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's event, which was supposed to be at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, but is online for your viewing pleasure. I'm Marisa Lagos. I am a correspondent for KQED's California Politics and Government Desk, and I co-host our Political Breakdown podcast. And I am thrilled to be here moderating today's program with author and television journalist Katy Tur. She's here to discuss her latest book, Rough Draft. Katy's an anchor for MSNBC Live and has reported for other NBC programs, including Early Today, Tonight, NBC Nightly News, Meet the Press, WNBC TV, MSNBC, and the one you've all been waiting for, the Weather Channel. In Rough Draft, Katy opens up about the oftentimes ignored challenges, dangers, and hardship faced by the broadcast media, from always being under the public eye to dealing with a news climate that is increasingly hectic, political, and hostile. She also talks about her relationship with her parents, both journalists themselves, and how that shaped her journey to fame. And if you have questions for Katy, I will be taking them later in the script, so you can put them in the text chat on YouTube, and we'll get to those later. In the meantime, welcome Katy Tur to the virtual Commonwealth Club.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I had a 7 a.m. flight out to San Francisco, and I woke up at 5 a.m. only to find that the flight crew for my plane had not shown up, and that every single flight to San Francisco, literally everyone, was sold out. So I'm very sorry. I would have loved to have been there in person. I never get to come to San Francisco, so it was going to be a real treat. But this is the next best thing. And being with Marisa virtually is awesome, considering that, Marisa, you get me up to speed on California politics. Just the other day, frankly, when we were talking about the primaries and I was listening to NPR Morning Edition.
That was fun. That was 2 a.m. from the floor behind me. Very glamorous life of ours that we have. I think that's one of the actually really fun things about this book is like going behind the scenes. And I do think people think that this stuff is way more glam than it is. It's a lot of waiting around often, right?
In fact, you were in the basement where I broadcast most of my show during the pandemic, except this is a clean version of it. Before the cameras were still in, we had cockroaches running around and peeling plaster, and these beams weren't here. So
you couldn't see any of that though, right?
Super glamorous.
Well, this is a really compelling book. I gotta say, I was a little bit like, really, Katy Tur wrote another memoir? Like, I mean, she's like my age, and what could she possibly have to say? And then I get into it and I'm like, oh my God. And I gotta say, I kind of felt like a kinship with you. I grew up in San Diego. I went to UC Santa Barbara. So a lot of the details in this book, my grandparents were in Venice Beach during the riots. And I remember getting the pictures of them with like the National Guard at the time. So, but if folks haven't read the book yet, let's tell them what the hell we're talking about. So I wanted to kind of start at the beginning with your parents, because a lot of this book is about them and your relationship with them and their own relationship with one another and with journalism. So talk to us just about who they are. How did they meet? How did the Turs become a tour de force to begin with?
I like your pun there. That's very good. How did my parents come to meet each other? My mom worked at the Bruin Theater in Westwood. And my dad was a skinny 17, 18-year-old kid who thought my mom was beautiful. And he'd come up to the ticket counter every night for, I think, a month. And he would say, please, can I take your picture? And she looked at him and she thought, I'm a graduate student in philosophy at UCLA. What is this? I think she was 23. What is this little skinny kid doing trying to ask me out? He's way too young for me. But eventually she wore him down, or he wore my mom down, and she agreed to go on a date with him. And their first date was covering some, I think, vandalism at a high school. And he tried to sell the photos to the LA Times. And then their second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth date was covering the Skid Row stabber. in Skid Row, because
Nothing's as
what's
romance.
more romantic than trying to find a serial killer in the middle of the night? But that's how their love affair started, and from there, over many years, they built a company called Los Angeles News Service, and it started out as a stringer business. And they got a plane, and they realized that planes weren't great to cover news with because they couldn't be stationary; they had to glide around. And then my dad managed to convince a helicopter company to give him a helicopter, even though he was 25 and he had no money, and his cameraman was a girl. Um, and they did. And he created Capturing News from the Sky in Los Angeles and basically popularized the television pursuit, the live coverage of a police pursuit. I think they covered, if not the first one live, then the second one, and then everyone after that in the 80s and 90s. And from there, they got the OJ Simpson chase, the slow speed chase in the Bronco. They found OJ first. The Reginald Denny beating during the riots, the earthquake, Malibu fires, Madonna flipping off the camera during her clifftop wedding to Sean Penn, which didn't last very long.
I was about to say, I forgot that they were married, honestly, until reading that we're married.
It didn't last. Let's put it that way.
So,
they did a lot of amazing things.
Yeah. And you kind of grew up in part in the back seat of that helicopter. Like, do you have an earliest memory of, your first news event, or like how did it feel too as a kid? Like, did you know what your parents were doing?
So my earliest memory, and this might not be, it's hard to, when we get to anyone's age, we grow out of childhood. So I think one of my earliest memories is watching a tape that they compiled from their stringer video. I think it was before they had the helicopter, or maybe it was the first helicopter, and it was like just some gruesome video of car crashes on freeways. And I remember thinking, like, I shouldn't be seeing this. I'm like way too young to be seeing a pile of burnt skin on the ground. But I think my earliest memories of being in the helicopter, beyond covering the fires, and you could feel that we'd get so close that you could feel the flames on your shins, the Malibu fires, was covering the Rose Parade in Los Angeles in the 80s. And the Rose Parade was a magical experience because for a little kid, it was like a bedtime story come to life. And we'd cover it, and I would look at the giant flowered rocking horses, or the bear on its head, or the elephants, and I was fascinated by it. There's one story, in fact, I didn't put it in the book because, well, I just couldn't quite find a way to fit it in. But we're covering the Rose Parade, and I'm with my dad and a friend of his and his son, who's also my age. I think I'm 4, maybe I'm 5. And I am so comfortable in the helicopter at that point. It was like I spent more time in the helicopter than I did in my own bed, that I unbuckled my seatbelt. I got up, I went to the door, I opened the helicopter door, and I just looked down at the parade below me. And my dad says that in that moment, he almost had a heart attack. Told me to sit down gently, and then immediately landed the helicopter. But it shows you just how comfortable I was in that space, because it felt to me like home.
Which is wild, because helicopters terrify me.
I went up in one for the first time the other day, for the first time in 24 years since my parents lost their helicopter. And I get nervous on planes. I get afraid of heights. And I had no nerves in this helicopter. I felt like it. My dad used to say, flying a helicopter made you feel like an angel, because you're floating above the ground. You're getting an angel-like view of a city. And that's exactly what it felt like.
Your dad, and we'll talk about him more, but obviously has a lot of crazy stories from that era, including I read at the end, I really liked what you said about how your mom was left off of some of the accolades because she was the female camera woman, and including that horrific but incredible footage of the LA riots. But they also kind of like cornered OJ Simpson before, I assume it was before the chase, right? When I don't know, before or after, but at Santa Monica Airport. And to me, that story in some ways really summed up the kind of journalism beyond the helicopter that your dad helped pioneer. Can you just talk about what that...
So this is after OJ gets acquitted of murder, And he goes into essentially the belly of the beast. He goes into a restaurant called DC3, which is um, a restaurant on the tarmac at the Santa Monica airport, and that's where my parents had their hangar. It's where they it was their base for covering the news. And my parents happened to be having lunch there that day. I mean, this was a very popular, cool place at the time. Gwyneth Paltrow had been a hostess at one point. It was kind of a hot spot in LA. And the waitress that was inside at the time didn't want to serve OJ lunch. She was very upset about it. And ultimately, they kicked him out. And my dad went down to the car, got the camera out, and was waiting as OJ walks out of the restaurant and says something just, I think, that would violate most journalistic standards today, or all journalistic standards, and might get you fired. Um, which is, how did it feel putting the knife into your ex-wife? This is after he had been acquitted. I mean, it kind of tells you what the mood was in Los Angeles at the time toward the conviction, which was that it was, at least in some circles. Um, and OJ just laughs it off. And a couple years after that, and my parents at this point were very near to the pinnacle of their career. I mean, they had covered OJ, they'd cover the riots, they'd covered the earthquakes. They had just bought another they were about to buy another helicopter, more high tech, and decommission the old one. So they're at the height of their careers. They're making a ton of money. We have Porsches. We're going on Hawaiian vacations. I mean, my brother and I in private school, life is good. But that example of my dad saying that was an example of the risks that he would take and the unnecessary risks.
Yeah, it's very like TMZ of these days today, right? That sort of like confrontational. Well, when you think about that, I mean, because you also detail in this book your dad's anger and abuse towards your mom and you and your brother and the family dog. But I just wonder like how you kind of think about his impact on journalism, given, because I think a lot of your love for it came from both of your parents, but I can imagine, like, to your point, that you've also had to kind of shunt off some of that legacy.
It's complicated. So, I mean, they would get into confrontations with the cops about what they could cover and what they can't cover, where they could go and where they could not go. In fact, my dad went to Peabody. I think my parents went to Peabody for coverage of an earthquake up near San Francisco in the 80s, and the cops weren't letting anybody through, even though my dad had the penal code. He knew the law, and journalists had a right to go cover it. And ultimately, my dad pushed through and just defied the cops and went and shot the images of this town and the destruction, and ultimately again won a Peabody, which is one of the most prestigious awards you can get in our business. And that's an example of having the guts to defy the cops for a ultimately noble end, a worthwhile end. And I inherited a lot of that. And I think that there's a lot of footage that they shot, a lot of journalism that they did that was groundbreaking and important and, country changing, necessary stuff for the country to see. But on the flip side, a lot of it was also kind of destructive for the news business in the long run. The live coverage of police pursuits, live breaking in the moment, no context really around them about why this person is running other than what the cops told us they had a stolen license plate or whatever. And so this live coverage that was so compelling, that drove giant ratings, fed into this idea that news had to be something more akin to entertainment. And I think you can draw a pretty straight line from that to the way that we covered Donald Trump's campaign in 2016.
Yeah, and hearing you talk about police chases too, I think it's this interesting dichotomy where, like, your dad was often facing off with police, but he was also kind of serving as their mouthpiece in some of these situations, right? When you give this sort of unfettered, I mean, I think about
I guess
this.
You're right with like the police pursuits. I think you could say that. But then he would really push back on the cops. I mean,
Right.
during the riots, he said, when he was covering Reginald Denny getting pulled out of both my parents, by the way, were covering getting Reginald Denny getting pulled out of the red gravel truck and beaten by accused and convicted gang members. He said very infamously, the LAPD has abandoned the city. And that did not earn him a lot of friends within the law enforcement community because they took a lot of heat for pulling back and allowing the riots to just expand across the city, the looting and the fires. I mean, it was a really ugly, there was ugly few miles around South Central Los Angeles that was at the time just lawless. So it did, again, it cut both ways. I mean, he had some people in law enforcement and officials in the fire department or even the state that just hated his guts for what he did, and feeling like he was being reckless. And my parents will argue, no, we were actually exposing wrongdoing, and that's why he didn't like us. But then they also had some real serious allies, like the DA thought they were great. One of the DAs. There was, firefighters who would come to the hangar and, get rides. A fire department helicopter pilot taught my dad how to fly. So it was good and it was bad.
Yeah. It reminds me when one of the gas companies out here blew up a neighborhood in San Bruno. I remember having one of those face-offs where you're like, no, legally I'm allowed to go behind this line. And, you have to make a decision as a reporter, like, am I more used? Well, right. And am I more used in the back of a cruiser? Like, it doesn't matter if I'm right, if they're going to still arrest me and I'm going to have to fight this later. So.
I mean, it helps to carry a copy of the penal code.
Totally.
Which is what my dad would do. I mean, he could recite the actual penal code by heart that allowed him to cross police and fire lines.
So I want to talk about you, not just your dad. But I'm curious, like, what made you decide at this moment to be so brutally honest about, I guess starting with your childhood and the abuse and his anger, because, this is, like I said, this is the second book you've written. You have not been, I think, in the past as public about it.
I touched on it a little bit in the last book, and I got a lot of people saying that was the most interesting, believe it or not, part of the last book, which was centered around the Trump campaign, and they wanted to know more. I always knew that at some point I'd have to get this story down on paper because it is an incredible story, the story of my parents' career and the way that they shaped the news business, and then I guess me to a degree. I knew it was going to come out of me eventually. Did I think it would be this moment? No. What precipitated it was the pandemic. And in the middle of the pandemic, I was just about to turn 38, and I started to spiral emotionally. I was in this basement that you see behind me, broadcasting my show alone every single day. My husband did it down here for a few months, but then went back to the studio. But I stayed down here alone with just the voices in my head. Some of them were actual real voices in the control room. The other ones were just my own voices in my head. And I would get to thinking, we are a country that is in the middle of a life and death pandemic, but can't agree on issues of life and death. And that scared me. Can't agree on science. And that scared me. Politics was another more terrible version of that fed into why we couldn't agree on science. And I started, I made a mistake in my career. I tweeted about Kim Jong-un having brain damage. I had source information. I misread an email thinking it was reportable. It was not reportable yet. And I tweeted it. I was wrong. And it was a bad, really super bad thing to be wrong about. I pulled it back within 2 minutes, but it was like a moment where I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get fired over a stupid tweet. Like, what am I doing? And I just spun out, and I thought, no one likes me. Everyone hates me. My career is BS. I might be making things worse in the world because we can't agree on anything. My parents lost everything at 38. Like, maybe it's me. Maybe it's just, maybe this was the way it's supposed to be. I got paranoid and a little bit, what's the word? Superstitious. And then in the middle of all that, my mom sends me a hard drive. And on this hard drive contains thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of videotape. It is all of the news footage they shot in their career. So the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. And it's my entire childhood as well, because they also shot me and my brother as kids and our lives. So it's me as a newborn up to me as an early 20-something year old. I saw my whole life. And a lot of it is stuff that I had been running away from for 15, 16, 17 years. I left Los Angeles and I didn't really go back. Um, and my relationship with my father has not been great. And I realized that if, in order to figure out what I was doing and where I was going, and whether I still wanted to be a journalist, whether the voices in my head were real or just imagined, I needed to figure out where I came from, and I needed to confront some of the ugliness, some of the stuff that I didn't even tell my husband that I had been avoiding for so long.
How's that been? Like, I mean, I imagine it was probably scary, but was it
You're a
therapeutic?
good interviewer. How's that been? It was hard. It was really hard. It was really, really difficult because it's hard to hold two ideas in your head at the same time, which is I love my childhood. I hated my childhood. I love what my parents did for journalism. And I think what they did for journalism was really destructive. Obviously not intentionally. I don't think they were trying to destroy things. And so going back and trying to face it and understand it, at times I felt nearly impossible. And I hit a number of walls in the writing process where I didn't want to go any deeper. I had luckily a few people around me that were willing to push me into the darker corners and say, you really got to read, like, this is an important part of this. You got to put it on paper. And now when I look back at the finished product, you have to read it a bunch of times when you edit it to make sure there's no typos and to make sure everything's accurate. And so I've read through the book now like 10, 20, 30 times. And I'm struck as I'm reading it at how exciting and fun and happy it is in the first few chapters. And then I think to myself, oh my God, my childhood is wonderful. I miss my dad so much. And then I get to the darker chapters and I think, oh my God, no wonder I've been so angry about it. And no wonder we don't have much of a relationship. And then, you get past that and you move on to some of the lightheartedness about meeting my husband and like going to a Fish concert. And then we get back into the deep, dark, ugly stuff, which is the pandemic and the state of our politics and a little bit of media criticism. So, it's been helpful for me because I feel like I have, as Jack Donaghy in the 30 Rock would say to Liz Lemon, gone down into the crevasse. And now I'm coming back up. I feel better. Having done this.
Well, and it's like an easy read. And I mean that as a compliment. It's very compelling. And I think as somebody, in broadcast, like I was just struck by like how you weave things together sort of chronologically and emotionally, because as somebody who hasn't written a book yet, I hope, it's like sort of seems terrifying. I also imagine it's sort of like a big journalism story, which is like you probably know it's done when you're just so sick of it you never want to look at it again. So let's just talk a little bit about how you got to where you are career-wise, because you went to UC Santa Barbara, as I mentioned, my alma mater as well. Go Gauchos. So I'm like 2 years older than you. So we probably overlapped. I actually met my husband at the Daily Nexus, and now we have two children.
Really?
The school newspaper there, yes.
We might have been at the James Joyce together at some point.
Yes, for sure. Oh, well, and it's funny because I was like, oh gosh, how come we never met? But you were really trying to avoid journalism when you were
I was not a part of it at all. I didn't work for the Daily Nexus, yeah.
So what, talk about that. I mean, you were talking about law, you were talking about becoming a doctor. And then I guess much like your parents, you were on a date and found yourself unable to talk yourself out of talking yourself past a police line, essentially.
Yeah. So I was a junior or a senior, and I was going to be a doctor. And so at first when I went to college, I was going to be a doctor. And then I got an F in calculus, like an actual F, is my first F in my entire life. And I got a C- in chemistry. And I thought, I can't. They've weeded me out. They've done their jobs. They've gotten rid of
I took the biology of AIDS at UC Santa Barbara and got like a C in it. Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm going to stick with English major.
Not cut out for this, not doing it. And then I was like, I'll be a philosophy major. I love philosophy. I love thinking about the big problems of the world. I just liked getting lost in the weeds of that. And my dad at the time was like, "What are you doing? Philosophy? Like, I thought you were going to be a doctor." And I said, "No, it's fine. I'm going to be a lawyer. Philosophy is very good for the LSAT." And then I was sitting in the counselor's office and they said, "You need this score to get into UCLA." And I thought, "Oh God, I'm so done with studying and taking tests." And so I was already starting to think, what else could I do with myself? When I'm driving back from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara along PCH with my boyfriend at the time. And we'd been together for all of college. And I'm in this old beat up Jeep and there's a police line because Malibu was on fire, because Malibu was always on fire.
Yeah.
And you can't go any further. You got to go around. And I remember thinking, you know what? No, I want to go in. I want to see the smoke. I want to feel the smoke. And I was stopped by the officer. I showed him my press ID. And to give you a little bit backstory on the press ID, I wish I had it on me. My dad had given me a CHP press pass for Los Angeles News Service a few years earlier when I went to college and said, "You should hang on to this." And I said, "Are you serious? This is not real." It was a picture from my 10th grade yearbook pasted over my grandmother's photo. My grandmother was part of the business and my grandmother was named Judy. It covered every letter but Y. So it was my 10th grade yearbook photo and it said Y TER, Los Angeles News Service. And I remember saying, "Okay, whatever, I'll put it in my wallet. I'm never going to need this. I'm a hostess at a brewery. We don't need a press pass to do that job." And in the moment I thought, "Oh, I have my press pass. I can get in." And I showed the CHP officer my ID and he said, I thought he must know that he said, where's your crew? Where's your gear?" And I said, "Oh, they're up ahead. I'm supposed to go meet them."
Meanwhile, the boyfriend's sitting next to you still.
My boyfriend's sitting next to me, quiet. And he gave me this look and he said, "Okay, go through." And so we're driving through and my boyfriend looks at me after we got out of earshot of the cop and said, "I've never seen you more confident than you just were lying to that officer." And I remember verbatim what he said. It was a seminal moment in my life because at that point it clicked. This is what I want to do. I want to be a journalist. I want to stand in the middle of the fire.
So interesting because I feel like him seeing that in you, like I see that in myself where like if I'm off work, I'm like I would never like sneak into a backstage area at a concert or something. But if I'm working, I'm like better to beg for forgiveness than ask for,
It's
like,
weird. It'll turn
this...
something on in you where you have more confidence than you have normally. And I don't know about you, but like I used to be, when I was an international correspondent, I found that I enjoyed traveling the world more for work than I did for my pleasure because I felt like I got an inside track on a place. I felt like I was there to understand it rather than there just to
Right.
gawk
It's
at
almost
the
like you feel less out of place somewhere when you
totally.
have a mission. Yeah. So you end up moving to New York after working in LA for a little bit, in some ways to escape your dad, really. And you, like your first job, you kind of, you said no to something, which again, I have some experience with that in my career as well, that people are like, "What are you doing?" Um, and I think you just talk about it, that first job, that you felt like you kind of had a target on you because you were confident. Is that the same thing we're talking about here, which is like you just had this sense of purpose and like this is what I'm supposed to do?
This sense is this completely unearned sense of superiority that my parents gave me because I grew up in the news business. So I just felt like I knew this better than the rest of you did. And it didn't really earn me friends. I was kind of a jerk. I wasn't a jerk outwardly, but I think the way I carried myself was a bit jerky. And it was partially because I thought I knew it all, and then partially because I was deeply insecure. And there was a story where I worked at a place called News 12 Brooklyn. And the actual tagline of this place is "as local news gets." It's as small as it comes. And you have to carry your own camera. You've got to shoot your own stand-ups. You've got to do your own reporting, your own writing, your own editing, your own driving to the story. You were alone. It was all on you, which is a great way to learn. And we it's like a funny story about how I had to what I had to do to get on air, which I will leave you to read, which hopefully will make you laugh. Um, but in order to, or just one night I was there, it was late at night, and I got a call from the assignment desk 5 minutes before I was off. It was 11 o'clock, and she said, "We need you to go to cover a fire." And it was like a small one alarm fire that was not a big deal, and it was very late at night. It was in an area that wasn't safe. I knew that there weren't going to be a lot of other news stations there, and I said, "No, I'm not going. I'm not doing that." And I remember the assignment editor saying, like, "What do you mean no? You can't say no." And I said, "If you want it so badly, you can cover it yourself." And from that point on, I got the nickname Princess. And then when I went back to the station to have a meeting with the news director, because I worked in a satellite station, I found that all the tapes that I had, and they organized story by the reporter who covered them, all of my tapes, which said Tur, had a D added to them. So I became Princess Turd at this station, which was lovely. It was so charming.
You have toddlers, but I can tell you, as the mother of 6 and 9-year-old boys, that your kids will find that incredibly funny in a couple of years if you tell them.
I was already sensitive to it because my middle name is Bear, and I got called Bear Turd growing up. So I thought, oh, ow.
Yeah, but you did really cut your teeth there and then at WPIX, or how do they say it?
So it was News 12, and then it was WPIX, and then it was the Weather Channel, and yeah, I can go through it. Yeah.
Yeah, but just briefly, we don't have to spend time on it, but I felt like it really rang true what you talked about covering the city for WPIX, and like how important that is in a reporter's career to really have that type of experience of like just like getting to know a place and really owning it and feeling part of it in a way. Is that
Well, that's the beauty of what you do, and how NPR is set up. So, NPR, there's a national, and you tell me if I'm wrong about this, there's a national hub, and then they feed off of the local hubs. And that's the similar way that the networks and television operate, but not quite as symbiotically as you do. And when you work in local news and television, you really start to understand a place that a national reporter, in a way that a national reporter could never understand the place. You get to learn the local officials, you get to learn the individual neighborhoods, the individual people, what they care about, the corruption that they're worried about, the potholes that they need filled, the hot water that gets turned off, like all of the small issues that matter in their everyday lives. So, by the way, if you don't watch local news, I think you should watch local news, because local news covers the stuff that matters to your city. And you want to know what's going on in your city, because if it's not going well, or if there's a corrupt politician, or if there are issues that get unobserved, you lose out on that, especially in the middle of a midterm year where you're voting for big deal positions,
Hopefully.
as
Hopefully, but
as we all are right now. So I learned about New York in a way that I felt privileged to know. I knew the city better than people who lived here their whole lives knew it. I went to neighborhoods they would never go to. I spoke to people they would never speak to. And from that, learning how to develop sources, learning how to talk to people, learning about issues that matter in everyday lives, I was able to take all of that education and make it more meaningful when I worked at the network. I will give you an example. Just the other day here in New York, there was a subway shooting, um, down from pretty close to where I live, actually, in Brooklyn. And I was sent to go cover it on the ground, and to anchor reporter it for the entire day. And I was able to call on all of the reporting and knowledge that I had earned over the years of being a local reporter here in the city, to inform the reporting that I was doing for a national audience about what was happening. For instance, the fact that the security cameras didn't work in the subway. You might think that that's so surprising. Why would a security camera not work in the subway in New York City? Well, we have a problem with security cameras all over the city. And it's been an issue now for going on 15 years, more than that, at least since I was covering it here in local. And that, I find, is one of the most beneficial reasons to start your career somewhere small and to learn about it, so that you can be a better reporter when you get to a bigger stage.
All right. So the Weather Channel was kind of a big break for you, and it ends up leading to meeting Brian Williams and ending up at WNBC and doing some stories for Nightly News. And I guess this is a good transition into your dad's transition. And oh my God, my children are, I'm sorry, ringing the doorbell. I'm just going to ignore them. But like, you talk about like there's your strategy as you're trying to get these big, national stories. And it was really just like showing up at the news meeting. So tell us about that, and then like how that then leads to you being in Boston. And were you a stringer at the time? Were you even on staff?
I was on staff
Okay.
at the network, and sorry about this squeaking. And I think this is an interesting way to pull back the curtain on the way network news works and the way we produce a show every night. So there's a 2:30 editorial meeting every night for Nightly News. I assume it's similar for Evening News and for ABC World News. And the whole staff would gather around a conference table. Brian Williams, who was the anchor at the time, would be there, the executive producer, all of the senior producers, the writers, the graphics producers, the PAs, and a lot of the times, a lot of the correspondents. And when you start off at the network, and I was new at the time, you don't immediately get a space in the broadcast. You really have to fight to be on television, to cover a story. And when I wasn't on the broadcast, I would go to both the morning meeting and the afternoon meeting and just try to pick up a scrap. And in this instance, I was there just ready to jump on whatever they needed to fill a hole in the show, or whatever might have developed during the day. And while we were there discussing, what's the lead story, what's the second story, what's going to kick the show, the social media producer is sitting in front of a laptop and he gasps. And we look at him and he said there were explosions at the Boston Marathon. And he sees this first. I mean, this is like, when Twitter started to become a really big deal. He sees it first on social media. It's not on a wire. It's not on a pager, which is the way we used to get things, not a call from a local. It is on Twitter. And all we see there are a couple of images of fire clouds, big yellow and black smoke. And because it's just those still images and nothing more. I mean, it's immediately after it happened. You don't know exactly what it was, and you don't want to jump immediately to terrorism because you want to rule out everything else first, because terrorism is so, forgive the pun, explosive. And so I thought, is it a steam pipe explosion? I've covered those. Doesn't quite look like that. Is it a gas explosion? Doesn't quite look like that. And then another report came in about shrapnel wounds, and you're like, oh God, no, this is going to be big. And it was clear within seconds that this was going to, whatever it was, lead the show and blow out the show. And I said, before anyone even asked me to do anything, I said, I'm going to go cover this. I'm getting on a plane right now. I'm leaving. And I don't even think I got a yes. I just walked out the door. I went to 6th Avenue because we're at 30 Rock, hailed a cab and went to LaGuardia. And it was 2:30. I thought if I got lucky with traffic, I'd make a 4:00 flight. And I did. Then I made it by, some miracle to Boston to be on air at the top of our broadcast at 6:30. And it felt to me like a bit of a professional coup. Like I had lived up to my parents' billing as somebody who's able to drop everything and just run.
Yeah. And what a story too. And in the middle of all this, your father calls you up with a little bit of news.
So this is why the book was so hard to write, because, I'm going to preface this next story with just a little bit of information about the relationship with my dad and I before then. And we didn't touch too much on it. My dad was dynamic and magnetic and fun and exciting. Reporters that would come cover my parents likened my dad to Tom Cruise in Top Gun. He was, he wore leather bomber jackets and aviator glasses, and he knew everything about flight. He would give these impromptu tours and lessons about helicopters and what they can do. And when you watched one of his live reports, it was very hard to tune away. He just was captivating. And I thought he was the coolest, most exciting person in the world. On the flip side, he was also one of the scariest people in the world. And his anger could be explosive and violent. And I dealt with that. My whole family dealt with that growing up. I tried to make a list one time of all the things that my dad threw at my mom over the years, and it included camera batteries, big, giant batteries, and keys, radios. And we constantly lived between these two extremes. It was really fun. It was really exciting. It was really scary. And the violence was physical, it was emotional, it was loud, it was just yelling and screaming, and sometimes it would get physical with my brother and I, sometimes. Um, and that made it really complicated to look back at my history and to try and figure out how I felt about it, because I loved it and I hated it at the same time. And as I got older, as I became a teenager and I got older, my relationship with my dad became more and more strained, because I became old enough to know that it wasn't okay. It wasn't just normal. And so I ran away, I moved to New York, and I put distance there. And, we'd talk on the phone, but it was always heavy or hard, or like, it just always felt like at any moment it could turn into something ugly, because I was hanging on to all of this anger over his anger, and he was still pretty angry. So in 2013, when I'm covering the Boston bombings, I hadn't heard from my dad in a few days. And one night I'm sitting, this is while the manhunt is going on. I'm sitting in my hotel room eating a cheeseburger. It's the first meal I had that wasn't out of plastic. And I get a call from my dad. And I remember thinking in the moment, do I have the energy for this right now? And I thought, well, yes, I do. It's my dad. I can't just not answer the phone. And he says, Catherine, are you sitting down? Are you alone? Can I talk to you? And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, I'm not a man. I'm a woman, and I'm transitioning, and Bob Tur is dead. I'm now going to be, at the time it was Hannah, now it's Zoe. And this is where all the rage came from. And good news, it's gone. It's gone. Bob Tur is dead. This is the new person, and everything is going to be better. And so the conversation, it was a long conversation with, highs and lows, but I remember feeling at the moment that it was an opening to talk about some of the anger and the violence that I had lived through and that I was holding on to try and wipe the slate clean, so that if my dad was not the person that she felt she was, and was transitioning into the honest version of herself, then let's transition together. Let's wipe away the ugliness by confronting it and talking about it, not just pretending it never existed. And that led to an even further break.
And how are you in touch now?
Not really.
Yeah. And she has not left behind the controversy. I don't want to spend all this time. That's her story. And folks want to Google Zoe Tur, you can see some of it. But I mean, even as part of the trans community, there's been a lot of outrageous things. One thing, and again, like, I don't want to spend a lot of time on Donald Trump, because you wrote a whole book about that, and we all spend too much time talking about Donald Trump. But you do have this great line about, my father's not Donald Trump and Donald Trump is not my father, but if anyone asked me, I'd recommend the same therapist.
So, part of part of the way that Donald Trump, we covered him, I think we inherited from what my parents did in the 90s, but part of the way that I covered Donald Trump and what I was able to do was because of what I inherited from my parents. And I laugh because I got a lot of questions during the campaign. Why do you keep doing this? Like, you're a foreign correspondent. Go back to London. Why are you enduring this? I mean, you're getting death threats. Trump himself is going after you, calling you a liar. Why keep doing it? Like, what are you doing? And I would never stop covering a groundbreaking moment, a history-changing moment, because what journalist doesn't sign up to see that? But also because, I think I just found it familiar. I would be I'd be on the campaign trail and my mom would text or someone would text and say, gosh, he sounds so much like your father. And that's not to say that Donald Trump and my father have the same views and they're the same person. They're not at all. But the way that they behave and their manner out to the world can be very similar. So I just knew instinctively that this is the type of personality that you got to stand up to. And not to say, like, I'm going to stand up to you, but just not allow that person to roll over you.
Well, and it struck, like, the thing that struck me the most was you talking about how when you did your first sit down with him, everyone who saw it in the newsroom before it aired was like, oh my gosh, that was really intense. And it took you going back to watch the tape to like recognize that the intensity of it, because it felt sort of normal.
Like a Perry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry if I'm tapping the pencil and it's making loud noise. I've been told in our private chat that I need to stop, so I'm going to put it down. My bad. You'd think as a TV professional I'd know what I was doing. Yeah, so when in this first sit down I did with Donald Trump, it got very antagonistic, and he was very angry with me, and he was condescending, and he was pissed off that I used the word pissed off. I think he felt like I wasn't just glowing over him. Like, he had the press coverage he'd gotten in the past before he was a presidential candidate was glowing coverage from Access Hollywood or from Fox News as a celebrity, not as a man running to be president of the United States. But in the moment, I just felt like it was, I was part of the Donald Trump show, because no one was taking him seriously as a candidate at the time. So when he was going after me, I thought, well, this is just part of his act for, The Apprentice, like that sort of attitude. And when I went back and I watched it, I fully understood that the anger wasn't acting. It wasn't big for the camera. It was coming from somewhere real.
Well, we have some audience questions I do want to get to, but before we do, I mean, not to gloss over all the wonderful parts of your life, but after or I guess during that campaign, you meet your husband Tony. You guys are both on the road together. You end up getting married in 2017, I believe. Have 2 children. But you really, I mean, I personally really enjoyed just how honest you were about how hard that was to give up your chair, your anchor chair, and have that first baby. And that, I mean, you literally tried to go back on camera, I think, like 5 days.
Like a psychopath. Like a psychopath. I mean, Marisa, you know what it's like. I mean, this job is, I think any job is demanding, and any job you love, or that you need, you want to hang on to. And it's scary to leave a job to give birth to a child. It's scary to be somebody who is so available to their career. I mean, in journalism, you are so available that they call you at 3 a.m., you're out the door. They call you at 3 p.m., you're out the door. They say, go cover this for 7 weeks. You're gone for 7 weeks. I mean, I had stories that would send me overseas for 7 weeks straight, and I would like have to buy clothes there because I wasn't prepared to be there, or on a campaign trail unexpectedly for 510 days. And I knew that having a kid was going to limit me. I wouldn't be able to do those things any longer. I would not be able to go at the drop of a hat. I would suddenly have real responsibilities that would keep me more rooted in place. And I struggled with losing my identity and losing my edge. So when I had my son, Teddy, this was right as the Mueller report was coming out, and I'd covered Donald Trump from the beginning of his campaign. I'd covered all of the coverage of the Mueller investigation. I mean, this was a big moment. I wanted to be there for it, but I gave birth. And I think on day 4 or 5 of Teddy's life, I'd had a C-section too, so I was a big mess, and the C-section got infected, so it was an even bigger mess. And also, like, I had a bit of postpartum drama. The Mueller report comes out, and I think, oh my God, I gotta cover this. I gotta go back to work. I'm on pain medication, fine, but it's like it's Tylenol and Motrin. I can stomach it. I'm bleeding, from all sorts of areas, but I can hold all that in for an hour. I can go in and do my show for an hour. I can keep it together. My mom will bring Teddy to the office. I can nurse beforehand. I'll nurse after. It will be fine. And I was so intent on going that I texted my boss, the president of MSNBC, and I said, I can come in. Like, I'll be there for an hour. I can come right now. This is Teddy's first pediatrician appointment, his first day back from the hospital. And my crazy self thought, no, I'll go to work. And my boss thankfully said, you're crazy. But Marisa, here's the most crazy thing about that. There are women out there who give birth and have to go back to work on day 5.
Yeah.
And they have no choice. And that is awful. And I know I'm a journalist, but that is just fundamentally awful and one of the biggest problems we have in this country.
I agree. And I mean, as somebody who took my 5-month-old to the DNC in 2016, he was 5 months old and like that almost killed me. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it.
Cross country 5-month-old? No, thank you.
Oh my God, yeah. I actually had a very funny moment with an assemblyman who was dressed in plain clothes and helped me clean up baby spit up. And I was like, was that a staffer? And then later I was like, oh my God, that was an elected official. All
I had Kamala Harris call me the same morning.
I was struck by that story.
I was in the bathroom and I was looking down at like the mess of my former body. And I hadn't been able to look down because I was so afraid of what I'd find, because the C-section was emergency. It was not what I expected. And I looked down and I'm holding my phone in my hand for some reason.
Right. Because why are you doing that? I remember checking Twitter at like 2 a.m. while breastfeeding. My husband's like, get it out of the bed, Lago.
So I'm just holding my phone, just in my bathroom, looking at that, if you're a woman, and it rings and I see a 415 area code. And I said, San Francisco. Who the heck do I know in San Francisco? I don't know anyone in San Francisco. And I answered the phone and I hear this Technicolor voice come over the speaker. Katie? And I said, yeah. And I'm like dead to the world. It's Kamala! And I remember thinking it was a joke. Like, who's doing a bad Kamala Harris impression? And she called to congratulate me for the baby. And I felt like this was a real test of like, this woman is running for president. Like, make a connection so that she'll give you an interview when you come back to work. Make sure that like there's a relationship there. And I fell flat in my face. I was like, she didn't know what I was doing. I didn't say, I'm in the bathroom looking at my bloody mess. But I sounded so flat. I was like, okay, great. She's like, how's the baby? I'm like, he's fine.
It's over there.
Because my head wasn't in the right place at all.
No, but that's fine because it shouldn't be. And they should give you a heads up before presidential candidates call your cell phone, in my opinion. I hope you save that phone number. Okay, I do have oh, damn. I have her old one, but I don't think from what I hear, it doesn't work if you call from California, no matter which number you have now. So a couple questions from the audience. What is the best professional piece of advice you've received and who is it from?
Oh, I've got a few things. One of them was from Keith Olbermann, frankly. And this was to stare. I'll try to do it with this camera, to stare at the pinhole of light in the camera, beyond the lens, down to there's a little inky black dot. And you try to stare directly in that, because that is where you will have line of sight with your viewer. So it'll be like you are talking to that person directly. And don't say hi, everybody. Say hi, singular, because it's between you and the one person watching, not you and everybody watching. Make it intimate. That was a really good piece of just basic TV advice.
Yeah. What 3 characteristics do you think make an impactful journalist?
Someone who's curious. Someone who's probably broken a bit. Not totally functional and sane. Curious, broken, and a clear thinker. That's a really big deal, to have a clear thinker, because you get confronted with a lot of big complicated topics or big chaotic scenes, and you have to be able to cut through them and make sense of it for the reader, the listener, or the viewer. So calm under pressure, clear thinker.
Absolutely. I'll just read this direct quote. You strike me as more optimistic, but given you find yourself in broadcast journalism, dark news days are common. It's hard for any of us to see the good, the light. How do you stay positive? And this person wants to know, I love seeing your smile every day at 11 a.m. PST. So how do you see the good and the solutions, they ask?
I guess I look at my kids and I think maybe you'll make things better. And it's also just really hard to be bummed when you are laughing and playing with a bubble machine. It's hard to be sad when there are bubbles. But I am pretty pessimistic. I am pretty down on society and the world. And that's because we have these big, seemingly intractable problems. And in order to tackle them, we've got to agree on the basics. And we don't agree on the basics. I mean, again, we don't agree on science. We don't agree on whether masks work, you know? We don't agree on, it can feel like we don't agree on whether the sky is blue or grass is green. And that to me is scary. And I don't know how we get back to a point where people have the same set of accepted facts, given that we have all these areas to go to. I mean, social media, Fox News, whatever dark corner or not so dark corner of the internet that you want to go to, and all of these bad actors who are trying to manipulate the way that you think, what you know, for their own personal gain. That's hard. Hard.
It is. And I was struck by something you did in the book where you kind of took a closer look at Walter Cronkite's career. Rest in peace. Not to pick on Mr. Cronkite, but you point out a lot of problematic things that happened during his career that just are not even acknowledged or probably remembered, as he is sort of lionized as this bygone era of trustworthy journalism. And it made me kind of, and it made me just think about how, like, regardless of whether the media landscape changes or whatever, like, in some ways that ship has sailed, because as you know, with social media, with all the things that sort of the spotlight, I mean, I would imagine like you can't go to the store without sometimes people maybe.
Well, you're very hyper aware now of everything you do everywhere. I mean, my husband and I were arguing on the street a few years ago about like him leaving his underwear on the ground in the apartment, and I was like, I'm so sick of picking up your socks and your underwear. Can you just put them in the laundry? And like we got into a stupid argument on the street, and in the middle of it, someone comes up to me and says, "Katie Tur," and I remember thinking, "Oh my god, we can't argue on the street. Like we have to."
That is going to be like on.
We got to keep it together. So like everything you do can be documented and it can follow you forever. And so what I read about in the book, I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I think anybody in journalism has probably had some version of this, where somebody online compares you to Walter Cronkite and says that he would be rolling over in his grave if he saw you today and all the journalism that you did. By the way, I've won a Walter Cronkite award, so maybe he would be, but I value that a lot, and I'm very proud of it. But Walter Cronkite was not a bastion of perfection. I mean, he was a flawed journalist himself, and I recount just a few examples that were documented in a book by Douglas Brinkley, the unofficial official history of Walter Cronkite. And some of the stuff is stuff that, like, if you did it today, you'd never live it down. You would be fired. It would follow you forever. You wouldn't have a career. I mean, he bugged the RNC. He bugged the Republican National Convention. He bugged a committee room and like literally bugged it and reported on it on the evening news.
As if, yeah.
I mean, Katie Tur bugged the RNC. Can you imagine? I'd never live it down. I would never live it down. And that's not to say that he wasn't a great journalist and that he didn't do great things. He did. He was a remarkable journalist, and he drew lines in the sand for this country, lines that stopped a war. Important stuff. He covered Watergate for an hour-long broadcast. just laid it all out for millions and millions and millions of Americans at a time where they were only getting drips and drabs of it from the paper. I mean, you could say that he really turned the corner on that investigation as well, but he wasn't perfect. And the standards that journalists are held to today are of perfection. Never do anything wrong, because if you do, it will follow you forever, and people will never trust you again. So I was trying to point out that when you compare a journalist to Walter Cronkite today, fine, do it, but make sure that you know all of Walter Cronkite's history. Make sure that you know that he was not perfect when you try to hold me up to a standard of perfection.
Ironically, too, because it doesn't seem that we hold that same standard up to the folks we are actually electing, right? It's kind of insane. It does feel sometimes, which leads me to what might be our final audience question. Katie, would you ever run for office? Expand on that, because that would be my response too, but tell us more.
I don't want to. I don't want that responsibility. I think if politics were a bit cleaner than they are now, it feels like all you do is campaign. Do you have a kid?
I have a child.
Yeah. We're almost done, I promise.
I know. Right?
No, it's dirty. It's dirty. You're campaigning all the time. You're asking people for money. I was talking to a Republican lawmaker a few years ago for a documentary that I did with Jacob Soboroff called American Swamp. And it was Ken Buck of Colorado. And he said, he admitted a dirty little secret, which is that lawmakers, he feels, will talk a big game about wanting to get something done. Oh, I need to fix this bridge. I gotta fix this bridge. But really don't want to get anything done. Because if they get something done, then the lobbyists or their corporate donors or their dark money might get offended and might not give them the money, or might spend the money on their opponent. So it's actually better to look like you're trying to get something done and are stopped at every turn. It's actually better to do nothing in Congress. It behooves you to do nothing in Congress. And that was very depressing.
Yeah. Not to mention, you have to think pretty highly of yourself. I know. I mean, obviously we have some ego wanting to go on TV and such, but I think it's almost, I don't want to offend all of the people we cover, but it's a little sociopathic to just think that you should be the person to fix everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but you need them. You need people like that to do something. Totally. I mean, it's not working so well, but you still need them. I also like this, you become such a target. I don't want it. No thanks.
Right, more so.
All right, you heard it here folks. Katie Tur is not running for office.
Sorry.
That is going to do it. We are all out of time. Thank you so much, Katie.
Marisa, will you please come on my show and talk California politics?
I would love to. I promise I will lock my kids up in a room before.
You don't have to.
We can just go to the
better
studio.
If they come in and interrupt.
Totally. Well, thank you also to our audience for being here. We are, again, very sorry that we couldn't do this in person, but we will maybe do it again in the future. And
I hope so. I will get there 2 days before so that there's no issue with flights. I'm so sorry.
Until your brother.
I would love
we'll
to
reschedule.
See you all in person, especially you, HD. I know you're watching.
Yeah, HD. Katie, we know how bummed you are. All right, Katie Tur is author of the new book, Rough Draft. Thank you again. It's available everywhere books are sold, and we would love to thank our audience for watching and participating. If you want to watch more programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in both virtual and in-person programming, you can go to commonwealth.org/events. Thank you, and stay safe out there.